ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ. ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ಇಂದಿರಾ ಚಂದ್ರಶೇಖರ್ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇಂದಿರಾ ಚಂದ್ರಶೇಖರ್ ಅವರು ವಿಜ್ಞಾನಿ, ಅವರು ಕತೆಗಾರರು ಮತ್ತು ಸಣ್ಣ ಕತೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಅಂತ ಮೀಸಲಾಗಿರೋ ಒಂದು ಆನ್ಲೈನ್ ನಿಯತಕಾಲಿಕ ಔಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ನ ಸಂಸ್ಥಾಪಕ ಸಂಪಾದಕರಾಗಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರು ಕಳೆದ 14 ವರ್ಷಗಳಿಂದ ಔಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಪ್ರಿಂಟ್ ಆನ್ಲೈನ್ ನಿಯತಕಾಲಿಕೆಯನ್ನ ನಡೆಸ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬಂದಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇವರ ಕಥಾ ಸಂಕಲನದ ಹೆಸರು ಪಾಲಿಮಾರ್ಫಿಸಮ್ ಅಂತ. ಮೇಡಮ್ ಪ್ಲೀಸ್ ಕಮ್ ಆನ್ ದ ಸ್ಟೇಜ್. ಈ ದಿನ 4 ವರ್ಷಗಳ ನಂತರ ನಾವು ಫಿಸಿಕಲ್ ಸ್ಪೇಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮನ ಮೊದಲಿಗೆ ಯಾವ ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಆರಿಸ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅಂದಾಗ ನಾವು ದೀಪದ ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿಂದಾನೇ ಶುರು ಮಾಡೋಣ ಅಂತ ನಿರ್ಧಾರ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಜೊತೆ ದೀಪದ ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ದೀಪದ ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಅವರು ಒಬ್ರು ಕವಿ ಮತ್ತು ಹೋರಾಟಗಾರ್ತಿ. ಅವರ ಹೆಸರು ದೀಪ. ಅವರು ದೀಪದ ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಅನ್ನೋ ಕಾವ್ಯನಾಮದಿಂದ ಬರೀತಾರೆ. ಇತ್ತೀಚೆಗೆ ಬಂದ ಅವರ ಕಥಾ ಸಂಕಲನ ಹುಣಸೆ ಚಿಗುರು ತುಂಬಾ ಚರ್ಚೆಯಲ್ಲಿದೆ. ಈ ದಿನ ನಾವು ಅದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಚರ್ಚೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ. ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ಸ್ಟೇಜ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಬನ್ನಿ. I would like to invite Indira Chandrasekhar Madam to address us and also to read a paragraph from your story so that it will be an inauguration for our 6th session of the Kate Reading.
ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಎವ್ರಿವನ್. ಸೊ ನಾನು ದಾದಾಪಿ ಆಗಾಗಲೇ ಹೇಳಿದೆ, ನನಗೆ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ಟೇಜ್ ನಿಂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ಐ ಫೀಲ್ ದಟ್ ಫಾರ್ಮ್ಯಾಲಿಟಿ ಬರುತ್ತಲ್ಲ, ನಾನು ಮಾತಾಡೋಕ್ಕೆ ಫ್ರೀಸ್ ಆಗ್ಬಿಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಸೊ ಸ್ಪೀಕ್ ಇಲ್ಲ ನೋ ದಟ್ಸ್ ಫೈನ್. ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡಿಂಗ್ ಇಸ್ ಓಕೆ. ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಮೋರ್ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ದಿ once you're here, you feel you have to present properly. So then if I speak in Kannada, it will be a disaster. So I'm going to speak in a mixture, if you don't mind. I'm so happy to be part of this. Thank you so much. Idu short story andre, as you can understand, it's very close to my heart. I've published short stories in English, but also translated into English for 14 years now. We'll be starting our 15th actually. So I have a great respect for the short story as a form. Of course, generally, we often think that because I like the short story and I champion the short story, that I don't read other forms. And of course, that's not true. I read novels and novellas, and I love also novels, novellas, other forms, small fiction, flash fiction, microfiction, non-fiction, and even poetry. So I was telling Dadapeer, I'm very selective with poetry. Nan prose andre nan tumba accommodate ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. Poetry andre ನಾನು ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ತುಂಬಾ self critical in my own writing. So ನನ್ನ poetry ನನಗೆ ಒಂದೇ excessive sentimental ಆಗಿ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ನನಗೆ. So I don't have that skill for poetry. So even when I'm reading poetry, I'm very strict with myself. So but how many of you are poets and prose writers? Dadapeer, I know, writes poetry. You are a poet.
Almost everyone
writes poetry. See, I don't know. I don't have that confidence. I look at it and I say, oh no, this is horrible. Whereas with short story, of course, self-critical I give, but then I have an idea of what I want to write. But I think the thing about short fiction that I love, actually, which I'm sure all of you being short story writers will also appreciate, in a way, I think that you're able in a short number of words to express, of course, to develop a plot in a short way. It doesn't have the expanse of the novel, but also to investigate the psychology and the emotional landscape of the character. So be it their sexuality, their family dynamics, their good and bad qualities, whatever they may be, all of those you're really able to develop in a short amount of time. So, and you're also able to have multiple narratives involving that character within a short story. Also, you could have only a single thread. either way one can do it, you have that flexibility. But I'm thinking of, you know, the thing is when I edit a story, or now that when I've translated Zadapir's work, you enter a story, you know, you're inside the story in a different way than if you just read it. You enter the narrative and so on. You get to feel as if you are also part of the story. So I'm going to use your story, Teru, as an example. So, you know, in Teru, for example, which I think is one of the stories of Dadapir's that I like the most, you have the relationship between the child and the mother. So that is one narrative thread. Then you have the family dynamics between the sisters, you have the family dynamics of the whole family, and then you have the social landscape, you have caste and society and religion and syncretic ways of being, all of that coming inside the story. And in addition to that, you have this great dramatic event of the Teru actually collapsing, right? So all of those narrative plots you can run through in a short story, even though you're using quite a short number of words. And so it's not, a short story is not a boring event, it's like it's a deep reading experience, and that's why I always like it. So now once I'm on the jury there for Dhaka Lit Live, or one of those literary festivals, and other novels short story collections in English. And I have to say, novel, I mean, it was very intense. So in a very short number of time, amount of time you have to read a huge number of books and keep clarity on the value of each one. And they're already of very high quality. So, but the thing that reading the novel was okay. You get into the story, you're in the whole world, and then you follow all these characters and you come out. Short story collection, and each story is a whole world. So instead of reading, you know, 5 books or whatever number they were, you were reading 3 novels, and then say 10 to 20 stories in each. So it was like 10 to 20 extra books you're reading, because each one intense a little bit. Short number of words, it's so intense, right? So you get, it's such an experience like that you that's why I love the short story. I think in a way it reveals our world to ourselves and to our readers in a way that is deeply satisfying. So, I mean, of course, when you're working with short story, you have to have a very good control of language. You really have to work with few words, and then in your head you know your character. They were born in Kashmir, went to Kanyakumari, along the way they had 3 lovers, they had this family relationship, mother died, but Allah would go. But the plot actually could be just about one love affair or something like that. But in Allah, it informs the way the character behaves, and you want to tell all of that. So then you just want to write down a whole paragraph with the character's history. And in a way, that whole skill of the short stories, you have to say, how do I reveal what the character is? Now, how do I edit it? How many lovers can I let go of? Maybe this guy doesn't matter, or this woman doesn't matter. How many threads of the travel journey do I need to include? That the editing skill and what to let go of in your story, that also requires so much, power. And I think as poets, you will have that advantage because you are writing, you're extracting the essence of an emotional experience. But if you're a prose writer, you really have to step away from the novel and step into the short story to write it like that. And so I think that's one of the reasons I really think that it's a non-trivial thing to be a short story writer. It really requires a great literary commitment for the hero, because you can put out the story, but then you have to go back and look at it and remove everything that doesn't matter to the story. Yeah, so I mean, I can go on and on about the excitement of the short story, but I think the one thing I would like to say is running out of print has been very, very important experience for me. Because the number of writers who send me work, and I mean, if we choose 5 to 10% of the works that come each quarter, because there's so many submissions, but sometimes fewer, sometimes less, sometimes more, but out of the submissions, we choose 5 to 10 only. And through that, I've learned, through the translations, I've learned about writers that I never knew all over India and the Indian subcontinent, or whose name I would have heard but I couldn't read because it was in another language. Or there was an old translation that was too heavy for me that I never really immersed in. But also in English writing, because it's a very contemporary kind of world, most of the English writers are living in a contemporary urban world. Adrinda ನನಗೆ ಒಂಥರ that viewpoint of a large number of people, I'm removed from my own world, and I am entering like a different series of spaces, and although many of them are urban, still provide such a diversity of viewpoint that I would not have otherwise known about. So from a personal point of view, it's been, but it's also tough as a writer, to edit marta daily, and then when I come to my own work, I'm editing and editing all the time, and I have to say, no, stop, just write. Anyway, so I will read a short excerpt, it will just be a couple of minutes, and I'm going to read from my own work, not from the work of print. And I think one of the things about the short stories, it allows you also, of course, to comment on things that you're thinking about. So very small context. I hope I'm not taking too much time. Okay? Yeah. So very short context. Nam ತಂದೆ ತಾಯಿ ಮನೆ ಬಂದು it was on the outskirts of the northern outskirts of the city, and now it is fully absorbed in the city. Time and everything because my father died some years ago, but anyway. So and ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಶಿಫ್ಟ್ ಆದಾಗ all you could see were the agricultural lands, paddy fields, ತೆಂಗಿನ ತೋಟ, nothing else, few houses here and there, and all the farmers were there working the land. Ivan, it's fully urbanized, and so the land is completely changed. Everything is completely gone, what was there before. You see one thing in Malaya or there, but that's it. But even though it's very painful to see that, if we move into an urban area, but if we see the transition, it's very painful. But even though it's very painful, that human energy has replaced the wild energy, so that its place is full of stories, full of family sagas, migration stories, of dynamics of society, caste, everything comes into play, Just 2 days back, there was a big Atte Sose drama, and the next house. There's always something exciting happening in a way, so that energy gets filled up, even though you are sad about the transition. But Al-Kere, one should say. And that Kere was part of one of that whole chain of lakes along the north, which connects to Hebar Lake, and Haider Tupu built that, and those channels, and then maintained by the Wadiya, so on and so forth. Our BBMP, I'm not quite sure what they do with it, but it's no longer as it used to be. So, Kere hodaga very deep mourning. A water will disappear, there's nothing, you can't replace it, it's gone. Of course, when your forest goes, it goes, but this was already, the pain is different that you feel. So now recent Kathivalu, a lot of them are focused on that lake shore area. And so, I'm just reading an excerpt. The other thing I have to say is Idral Barala, but one of the things I have to say is that one of the things I have to say is now, because of my science background, my stories also have some science fiction aspect, but that won't come into this excerpt. And in addition, also there are many things because of science, maybe, and also just humanity, then, which are my recurring themes in my writing, which are about birth and procreation, and especially because now in biological molecules, I used to work with biological molecules, and that is all about life. Life molecules that are in life, they're chemical molecules, but they're involved in the processes of life. So then what distinguishes life from non-life? And that ultimately it is that ability and drive to reproduce. So that kind of is another one of my obsessive themes that plays in back and forth into my various writings. So I'll just read. The lake shore was being gentrified. Cemented walkways appeared and play areas with bright plastic equipment. Even though I mourned the old watery terrain, if I were to be honest, that untamed incarnation of the lake had already been destroyed when people began to move into the area and toss their rubbish along the lake. The detritus of my neighbors' lives was full of polymeric material of the most indestructible kind that forever held various bodily excretions. I could not bear to think of all the creatures of the lake trying to make sense of the toxification and trying ineffectively to survive. And I much prefer to imagine the lake as it had been before, its uneven borders rich with reeds and rushes, wet and beautiful and filled with life. It is unclear when the land grabber gangs honed in on the lake. So all this construction development is a thing. So it's unclear when the land grabber gangs honed in on the lake. But the local onslaught of daily rubbish seemed like nothing in comparison to the truckloads of garbage and construction debris that were brought in from other areas. Once that happened, there was no hope left for that little aquatic subworld, that wild subcosmos of our neighborhood. If one thought about it in that context, the current plan of clean and gentrify to preserve the lake body was perhaps not such a bad thing. When I finally acquired the courage to venture out into the newly laid park, I found to my horror that the rubbish had not disappeared, but had simply been pushed behind the green hedges. Waste of every kind, pressed down and compacted, packed the long undulating lobes of the lake. It was on top of this landfill, behind the pretty hedges, hidden from middle-class eyes, that Shiva and Shashikala lived and bathed and presumably made love. Shall I continue just a little bit? So just to the end, what happens, all kinds of things happen. There's a huge natural disaster that takes place, many people die, and then somehow Shashikala re-enters her world. And she has by then become very fascinated by Shashikala. So she brings her to the house, and Shashikala is one of the garbage workers from that area, so they live there. So we stood at my front door for a minute, aware, alight. I reached out my hand, and as the gardener gasped, "Don't do it, Amma, don't do it," she looked down at my naked palm and laid her hand in mine. It felt rough and sandy, and was neither cool nor warm. I held it firmly and led her over the threshold. We entered my room, drew the curtains closed, and faced each other. Neither of us made a sound. Then she tossed her dupatta on the floor, and as did I. Layer by layer, we peeled off our garments, our movements naturally synchronized. When she drew the kurta over her head, and I did too, I could not see through my indigo cotton, but smelt that the air had turned marshy and humid. When I opened my eyes, she stood before me, her upper body bare, her breasts standing bold and young through the mossy velvet that covered her. So she's covered in these plants that have grown from the lake onto her skin. My body began to tremble, every nerve aligned. It was only when we had dropped the last of our clothing that I stretched my arms towards her, my skin ready and moist and receiving. Thank you so much. and congratulations on this entry into real life short story engagement and interaction. I'm very excited, and I hope that you will send me translations to our report. Thank you.